New Orleans folklore is a unique, supernatural tapestry shaped by centuries of African, French, Spanish, Caribbean, and Native American cultural syncretism. The city's complex relationship with isolation, swamp geography, and epidemic history has fostered an enduring ecosystem of cryptids, ghosts, and regional legends. So here is 5 folk tales of New Orleans to enjoy and subscribe, and leave a like please. Number 1. Marie Laveau. The core of the legend, the charismatic healer versus the occultist. While demonized by some early press, Laveau was renowned for tending to the sick, feeding the hungry, and fighting against yellow fever epidemics. The network. Historians speculate her massive supernatural influence was bolstered by her hairdressing career. She catered to the city's wealthy and politically elite, using the gossip and secrets she learned as leverage. Rituals and Congo Square. She held massive, legendary voodoo gatherings in Congo Square, utilizing music, dance, and snakes. Folklore and myths, agelessness and omnipresence. Tales claim Laveau could be in 2 places at once, and some rumors insisted she lived to over a century old. Marie II. Folklore dictates that she had a daughter, Marie II, who took over her mother's voodoo practices after her death. Historical consensus, however, suggests the daughter was actually a devout Catholic with no ties to the occult. Visiting and exploring Laveau's legacy. Laveau is believed to be buried in the Laveau-Lapillon family crypt at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. The Rougarou is a legendary shape-shifting werewolf-like creature embedded in Cajun and Creole folklore. Said to stalk the dark swamps, bayous, and sugarcane fields of South Louisiana, the beast is typically described as having a human body, with the head of a wolf or dog, and glowing, piercing red eyes. While traditional European werewolves lived in deep forests, the Louisiana monster adapted to the local landscape, becoming a predator hidden among the cypress trees and Spanish moss of the wetlands. The purpose of the tale. Historically, the legend of the Rougarou served 2 major social functions within Louisiana communities. The boogeyman cautionary tale. Parents used the creature to scare children into obeying rules, keeping their curfews, and avoiding the dangerous, alligator-infested swamplands where they could easily drown. Enforcing religious devotion. In French Catholic tradition, it was used to enforce religious rules. A common variation warns that anyone who breaks the rules of Lent for 7 years in a row will be cursed to transform into a Rougarou. The Casket Girls. The Casket Girls were a group of young French women who emigrated to colonial New Orleans in the early 18th century to marry settlers. Over the centuries, their grueling journey and peculiar luggage birthed New Orleans' famous urban legend that they brought vampires to the New World. The problem, in its earliest days, New Orleans was primarily populated by French soldiers, trappers, and convicts. The French government needed virtuous, civilian women to establish families and stabilize the volatile frontier colony. The recruitment, unlike previous waves of women who were sometimes forced out of French prisons, they were carefully selected orphans, church wards, and young women from decent families. The name, the French state gave each woman a small wooden trunk or suitcase filled with a dowry of clothes, linens, and personal items. These rectangular trunks were called cassettes. Over generations, the word was anglicized by locals into caskets. This law surrounds young women sent from France in the 1700s to marry colonists. They traveled with small, coffin-shaped trunks, cassettes, to hold their belongings. Over generations, local rumors twisted their history into a vampire myth, claiming the trunks actually carried the undead into the city. The pale complexion. After spending months below the dark decks of the transatlantic ships, the women arrived with extremely pale skin that blistered in the harsh Louisiana sun. The empty caskets. The nuns in charge of the convent were instructed to store the caskets unopened. When the nuns eventually attempted to open them, they were reportedly completely empty. The sealed attic. Fearing a demonic or undead presence, the nuns supposedly bolted the attic doors shut with nails blessed by the Pope and heavily blessed the building. Julia Brown. The legend of Julia Brown, affectionately known as Aunt Julia, is one of Louisiana's most chilling tales of prophecy and destruction. While the folklore paints her as a vengeful hoodoo priestess, historical records reveal a real, highly respected woman whose life became deeply intertwined with a catastrophic natural disaster. The legend and the curse. Julia Brown lived in the early 1900s in Frenia, a small, isolated German Creole farming settlement located in the Manchac Swamp, about 30 miles northwest of New Orleans. Because the remote town had no doctor, Julia served as the local midwife and folk healer, traiteur. As the story goes, she grew bitter in her later years, feeling that the ungrateful townsfolk were taking her services for granted. She began sitting on her front porch, rocking back and forth while strumming her guitar and singing an eerie, self-made tune. The 1915 hurricane. On September 29, 1915, Julia Brown passed away from old age. Out of respect, residents from Frenia and neighboring swamp towns gathered for her funeral. At 4 p.m., just as her casket was being handled, the legendary New Orleans hurricane of 1915, a massive Category 4 storm, slammed into the coast. The brutal storm surge swallowed Frenia, Ruddock, and Napton whole, tearing up railroad tracks and collapsing the local depot where people sought refuge. Over 275 people died across southeastern Louisiana, and the town of Frenia was completely erased from the map, never to be rebuilt. Local newspapers, including the Times-Picayune, noted that the storm was so violent that the funeral attendees panicked and fled, temporarily abandoning her casket. Though her outer wooden burial box was later recovered, her actual casket was never found. Madame Delphine LaLaurie. Built in 1831, the three-story estate was home to the wealthy socialite Marie Delphine LaLaurie and her husband, Dr. Louis LaLaurie. In April 1834, a fire broke out in the kitchen, revealing a horrific torture chamber in the mansion's attic where enslaved people were found severely abused and chained. An enraged mob ransacked the home, and the LaLauries fled to Paris, never to face justice. Pop culture and ghost stories. Today, the mansion is widely considered the most haunted house in New Orleans. Passers-by and ghost hunters have long reported hearing blood-curdling screams, the clanking of chains, and seeing ghostly figures in the windows. Madame Delphine LaLaurie was a wealthy 19th-century New Orleans socialite whose historical legacy is defined by horrific, sadistic cruelty. Beneath her public persona as an elegant hostess, she systematically tortured the enslaved people forced to work in her French Quarter estate, fleur-de-lis high society and privilege-born Marie Delphine McCarty. In 1787, she belonged to one of the most prominent, powerful white Creole families in colonial Louisiana. Her family tree boasted massive wealth, military prestige, and political power. Her cousin even served as the mayor of New Orleans. She was married 3 times, outliving her first 2 husbands. In 1832, she moved into the custom-built, neoclassical property at 1140 Royal Street with her 3rd husband, Dr. Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie. There, she stood at the absolute apex of high society, hosting extravagant, upper-class parties. Early investigations and legal defiance. Long before her crimes were universally exposed, local rumors swirled regarding her extreme cruelty. The roof incident. Around 1833, a young enslaved girl named Leah reportedly dropped a hairbrush while styling Delphine's hair. Enraged, LaLaurie chased the child through the mansion with a whip until Leah fell from the roof to her death. The fake auction. Authorities investigated the death and found Leah's body hidden in a well. LaLaurie was fined, and a court ordered her to forfeit and sell her enslaved workers at a public auction. However, LaLaurie bypassed the law by having her wealthy relatives buy the individuals and immediately sell them back to her in secret, allowing her to resume the abuse. The fire and shocking discovery. On April 10, 1834, a massive fire broke out in the Royal Street mansion. Rescuers rushed into the kitchen and found a 70-year-old enslaved woman chained to the stove. The woman confessed that she had intentionally set the fire as a desperate suicide attempt to escape LaLaurie's ongoing torment. The woman directed the arriving townsfolk to the locked attic. When bystanders broke down the doors, they discovered a makeshift torture chamber. Enslaved men and women were found severely mutilated, starved, chained to walls, and wearing spiked iron collars. Escape and the outraged mob. While white New Orleanians generally accepted the brutal system of slavery, the pure, sadistic extremity of LaLaurie's torture chamber crossed a line that deeply shocked the local community. A furious mob of thousands of New Orleans citizens gathered at the mansion. They rioted, systematically looting, smashing, and gutting the interior of the home. Madame LaLaurie lived out the remainder of her life in France and never returned to New Orleans. While local law includes highly dramatized rumors that she was killed by a wild boar while hunting, historical records indicate she died of natural causes in Paris on December 7, 1849. In the late 1930s, an old, cracked copper plate was discovered in New Orleans' historic St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. The French inscription stated that her remains had been exhumed from France and secretly reinterred in New Orleans, cementing her grim legacy back into the city's soil.